Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Lynn Rosenthal, and I'm the White House Advisor on Violence Against Women. And we couldn't be more thrilled to have all of you with us on this very exciting day today. What about the President's speech?
Awesome.
Shout out to Wawa.
Yeah.
That was for you, Pat. But this session is really your time. We want you to weigh in on the issues that you heard about this morning, and particularly how the issues you heard about this morning intersect with violence against women. But before we open it up, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the Attorney General of the United States. Many of you know, thank you. Many of you know Attorney General Holder from his long years in public service. Some of you remember when he was Deputy Attorney General in the early years of VAWA implementation. And you also may know that he was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, so he saw firsthand the effects of violence against women. In this administration, we've been so thrilled with his leadership, and particularly because he's expanded the approach of the department beyond the wonderful Office on Violence Against Women to focus in the Civil Rights Division and other parts of the department on violence against women across the board. So, Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Lynn, for those wonderful words, and welcome to everybody. It's great to have you all here as we discuss these very important issues. I want to first introduce B. Hansen, who is the new acting director of the Office of Violence Against Women at the Justice Department. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that we are here to listen and to learn. There's some things, some prepared remarks I'd like to share with you, but one of the things I think that we really want to get out of this hour or so that we're going to have to spend together, aside from a suntan that we're obviously going to get, is the ability to really kind of listen to you about your concerns, your thoughts. And I hope that, as friends, we will have a very candid conversation. And to the extent that you have concerns about things we're doing at the department, not as well, I want to hear that. If you have ideas about different approaches that we should be taking, I hope that you feel free to say that as well. If you want to say something positive about something that we're doing in the department, we'll take note of the time of that you say that. It doesn't happen very often in Washington, but that is acceptable as well. The work that we are doing in the department with regard to the issues that we're going to discuss could not be more important. Violence against women and girls really has tremendous consequences on the health and welfare of our communities and a really significant direct impact on our economy. And I thought that the President's remarks and drawing the connection between the variety of issues that he was talking about and the impact it has on our nation as a whole is something that we can't really lose sight of. Let's just talk about some of the economic costs of domestic violence. The CDC estimates that domestic violence costs our nation about $8 billion a year in lost productivity and health care costs alone. $8 billion. Domestic violence is responsible for the loss of about 8 million paid days of work normally, annually, or the equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs. And those are jaw-dropping numbers, and simply unacceptable. We have launched a range of efforts over the course of the last 3 years to prevent and to prosecute people who are responsible for violence against women and girls, and to help victims escape their situations and to help them rebuild their lives. Let me just talk a little about some of the grant initiatives that we have. This is for this Justice Department a top priority, and it is something that for me is extremely personal. When I was the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., I started a domestic violence unit. It was the first time we had one in that office. And it was really an interesting experience to see how many people were opposed to that notion. And it was really a fight that we had to win, and with a bunch of really brave advocates who were really dedicated, we were successful in creating that unit that has proved to be really effective, and I think in some ways been a model for things we've seen in other parts of the country. But it's personal for me as well. I am the father of 2 teenage girls, one 18, one 16. I'm married to a wonderful woman who's an OBGYN and who shares with me, some of the things that don't get reported, quite frankly, and that she hears from her patients about things that they are experiencing in this really tragic way. And that always strikes me as one of the reasons why I think one of the things we're going to be talking about, that redefinition of rape is so important. It's one of the things that Sharon, my wife, as I said, has shared with me. Since January of 2009, the Office of Violence Against Women has given grants totaling more than $1.5 billion to states, territories, local, and tribal governments, and to nonprofit organizations for activities related to combating violence against women. And this funding is really unparalleled in OVW's history. And with these investments, the Justice Department has really supported a range of activities, from initiatives aimed at preventing teen dating violence and sexual assaults, to improving reporting of these crimes, reducing the backlog on regard to rape kits, the building of the capacity of tribal courts to combat domestic violence. One of the things that, one of the first things I got briefed on when I became Attorney General was what a baby born on an Indian reservation can expect over the course of her life, and the violence that she will be expected to endure, be exposed to, and it is simply, it's an American tragedy that people don't know enough about, and something that we are determined to turn around. Tom Pirelli, who was the Associate Attorney General, spent a great deal of time dealing with tribal issues. It is something that we will maintain a focus on, as we have now Tony West in that position. There are several VW programs that support initiatives and organizations that, as I said, have a clear economic impact. Among them is a transitional housing program designed to provide transitional housing, financial assistance, and counseling, job training, and other support services for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, who are homeless and who are in need of shelter as a direct result of the violence that they are suffering. Since 2009, OVW has awarded more than $88 million in transitional housing awards. One of the things that I think we have to focus on, and the President touched on, is the reauthorization of VAWA. In 2012, as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, I am shocked that I have to bring this up as an issue. I am absolutely shocked that this is something that we are talking about. But it is nevertheless something that we have to focus on. I will continue to call on congressional leaders to take action in this regard and to approve this important legislation. The VAWA bill, reauthorization bill, will allow us to better assist victims and survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. It also includes really new provisions that would improve our ability to respond to the alarming rates of violence that we see against women in tribal communities. So I would urge you all that in that regard to keep up your great work, your advocacy in making something that should be not even bipartisan, this should be nonpartisan. This is a no-brainer. Nevertheless, we're fighting. So please continue your advocacy in that regard. I also want you to know that we're doing everything that we can to support you in a great many ways. We have meeting economic and public safety goals that we share. We need your help in that regard as well. I want you to focus on VAWA, but there are a whole range of other things that we're doing in the department where your voices, your desire for meetings, your advocacy will help us as well. And so I would hope that we will continue the good partnership that we have established in that regard. I want you to know that this is something that, for me, as I said, is a personal priority, and not only because of the women who surround me at my house, but also what I saw as a judge here in Washington, D.C., what I saw as U.S. Attorney when we started that domestic violence unit, the tragic consequences that I have seen that women have to endure, and frankly, where we need to be as a nation, and frankly, where we are now in 2012. We have made tremendous progress, but we still have a long way to go on this journey. So I hope that we'll have a good, frank exchange, as I said, and hopefully we'll come up with some good ideas and more solutions for the problems that concern all of us. So, Lynn, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And so we want to jump into all of that, and we particularly want to hear from you and tell us what we need to know about the intersection between economic advocacy and violence against women. Hold that thought for a minute, because I want to turn first to Ellie Smeal, because you're here. I want to take this opportunity to hear from you. the Feminist Majority Fund was very involved in the changing of the definition of rape in the Uniform Crime Reports. I think you had a question or comment about that.
Well, first, I'll do that unusual thing of congratulating you. But anyway, I wanted to congratulate the Department of Justice, your leadership, the FBI, for changing the definition of rape. It took a little time, 1927, but it was a very big step because it's now inclusive. It will now count most rapes, and before this time, most rapes were excluded. So I would like to ask you, with the new definition, how do you think it's going to help us in fighting sexual assault?
Well, I think that first I want to say and give a shout out to Valerie Jarrett, who's here with us. And when I became Attorney General in February of 2009, it only seems a few thousand years ago, one of the first things that Valerie and I talked about was the need to change the definition of rape. And just for those of you who don't know, I mean, 1927, the definition that we were working with was, quote, the carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will. And it's now been changed to the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. And I mean, if you look at the change, it is both a logical one and one that has helped us come up with ways in which we can better understand the nature of the problem. It will capture the numbers of people who suffer these horrendous attacks. It's a step forward in improving public safety. It gives us a better sense of what it is the nature of the problem is. We were missing too many women who were the subjects of sexual violence. And it will allow us to bring more offenders to justice. It also helps us with our funding so that we're able to identify what the nature of the problem is, the scope of the problem, and we can go to Congress with concrete numbers about why we need greater amounts of money in various parts of the department and other parts of the executive branch. So this has been, I think, a really, really important change, one, as was indicated, that was too long in the making, but one that I think will allow us to be even better at our jobs. And so I want to thank everybody here who helped us make that very necessary and overdue change.
The wonderful thing about it is the FBI at all levels voted for it, and all the relevant Department of Justice, I mean, your work on getting a unified position so that we will have enforcement was terrific.
Well, when Valerie Jarrett tells you to do something, it gets done. It gets done.
I want to turn to Rob Valente, Robin Hassler, Karma. Those of you who work in this field every day, tell us what it is we need to understand about this intersection and the issues we heard about this morning and violence against women.
Hi, I'm Rob Valente. I'm with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And I think that one of the most important things is access to justice, which I'm sure everyone in the Justice Department knows. But what we see, the 30,000 juvenile and family court justices see, is that victims of violence, the adult victims and the children who witness that and are secondarily hurt by that, do not have access to justice because they don't have the money for attorneys. And that's the bottom line. In our American system of justice, and I'm going to put quotation marks around justice right now, if you don't have a lawyer, you're not going to get the outcome that you need. And we do everything we can to help with pro se representation and protection order courts. The Justice Department has funded great programs like the Project Passport to make sure that everyone whose protection orders are filled out. You are doing great work on custody with the Office on Violence Against Women, which is one of the really big areas where there needs to be legal representation. But what it really comes down to is that this disproportionately affects women, and women make 77 cents to the man's dollar, and victims of domestic violence don't have access to the familial money. You know, they're not able to get that. Legal services has a long waiting list. And victims of sexual assault too, and stalking. Even though it's treated as a criminal matter, they have so many ancillary issues that have to be dealt with by a lawyer. What if you have to break your lease? You know, what if your locks are broken and they have to be replaced? What if your car has been broken into as part of stalking, as part of the sexual assault? All of these things, the counseling that's needed, we don't have those resources out there. We have the legal assistance for victims money, and I know that we can tell you that it's probably the most sought after money along with housing. Those are the two key issues. And it really speaks to what women don't have in this country. So if there's anything the Justice Department can do to increase legal representation and access to it, it means that you're improving justice for victims.
Those are excellent points. One of the things that we started in the department is something called the Access to Justice Initiative. And it is a way in which we hope to deal with the problem of indigent defense, but more than that, also a way in which we provide legal representation to, as you very correctly point out, to people who are victims of crime. 50 years or so after Gideon that guaranteed the right to a lawyer, we still have a problem in this nation with regard to getting access to lawyers. And it should not be a function of the amount of money that you have to have adequate representation, either because you are charged with a crime or you are a victim of a crime. The office that we started, Larry Tribe was the first director of that office, the esteemed Harvard professor, is really making strides, I think, in that regard. There is more that we need to do. We're also working on one of the things that you also talked about, the whole notion of the impact of exposure to violence. We know from the science that exposure to violence has a negative impact on people, and especially on younger people. And so we're really dealing with that as well, trying to come up with ways in which we can deal with that issue. And B, I don't know, maybe are the things that you would like to say in that regard?
Yeah, I think just a couple of issues with it, especially the legal assistance for victims program, and we know that one that's very much used, and making sure that we're getting more and more legal services for sexual assault, because we really have a dearth of programs that are focusing on the particular civil court issues that women have around sexual assault. So that is a big focus that we have in our grant program now, to expand those kind of services. The other thing that we had a roundtable last year looking at family court issues, and we had experts and many people, there are a few people in this room that were part of that, looking at family court and looking at some of the custody issues, and following up with some programs there, and looking at some sort of way to have a demonstration initiative to look at how can we expand the resources in family court and focus the resources in family court, and using that demonstration as a way to replicate those programs around the country. So very good points, and something that we want to continue to work with you all on.
But it's based on a foundation and a recognition that we have in the department that there are unique needs that women have who are the subjects of violence. There are unique issues that have to be dealt with. And it was one of the reasons why I was so insistent back in the day on this domestic violence unit. Women who are the victims of violence have needs that are different. It's just a reality from what you see with regard to other victims in the criminal justice system. So we start with that foundation concept, and we try to build from there.
Robin Thompson, you're looking at how VAWA grants can address economic advocacy, so you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and thank you very much, Attorney General Holder, for this opportunity. It's historic and wonderful today. I work with a group called Wider Opportunities for Women here in DC. I'm a consultant. I live in Tallahassee, but I'm up here working on economic trafficking issues. The WOW project, though, is one that OVW is now funding for both the STOP grant program and all of its grantees and transitional housing. But the STOP grant is what's very exciting, and I'm working with that. I've worked with them for a while. And that is to get the criminal justice system as a system to focus on the economic needs of women per se. So that we've got issues like restitution that forever we've known are important issues, but that they regularly go unordered by the court. Sometimes they go kind of solicited from the victims themselves, because we don't sit down with the victims and talk with them in detail about all the things that Rob just mentioned. You know, the security cameras that they need, the 3 days work she missed because he kept her up all night. And then the unique needs that sexual violence victims are facing now. If you think about what happens if they're raped on the job by a stranger or somebody else, and they lose their opportunities for advancement in that firm or whatever it is. But what's so exciting about this is to take the criminal justice system, which forever has known that economic needs hamper a woman from being free and secure, but getting them in particular to start looking at what they can do. If it's a cop on the scene, taking a better report so that he knows all those things, so she can get restitution or she can get a civil attorney to bring up those issues when she goes for the protection order. But it's really to get the lens to focus more keenly, and that would be the plea that I would have to ask the justice system to look at that. And it's been pretty exciting to hear prosecutors, law enforcement, and others say, you know, we really can do things differently when it comes to economic needs, in addition to prosecuting economic crimes. So if you think about the credit card fraud, the forced signing of tax returns, all of those things that he forces her to do, or that he just steals her identity, stalks her, there are all these economic issues. So that's why it's so thrilling to be here today, but also to know that the possible synergy between what we know as traditional economic prosecutions can really apply to victims of domestic and sexual violence.
And I think the points you raised there are good ones in the sense that I think we have to sensitize people in the criminal justice sphere to understand that there are, again, these unique needs. There are unique data collection efforts that you have to participate in. Judges have to understand that, you know, sexual violence has economic consequences. Need to be sensitized to that. Prosecutors need to understand that as well. And as you're trying to formulate pleas, perhaps, or if you're after a conviction trying to come up with what is an appropriate sentence, you have to take into account what are the economic consequences that this victim suffered as a result. So gathering that kind of information is important. And then crafting. Judges, as I said, have to be sensitized so that they craft these orders that require the perpetrator to make whole the victim, and then we have to come up with enforcement mechanisms. So it's just not a piece of paper that a judge signs that then doesn't have any impact. To the extent that somebody does not comply with an order, there should be consequences for that. I mean, if you look at those numbers that I was sharing at the beginning, you see the impact of this on our nation's economy. And if for that reason alone, there needs to be a greater emphasis on the things that you're talking about. But at the end of the day, we're also talking about a moral question. There's a fundamental moral question here. When somebody is attacked, when a woman suffers in a whole variety of ways, there is a moral imperative, I think, that our society has to understand, that, and an obligation that we have that we've not done, frankly, just as good a job as we need. Again, we're in 2012 and we're having these kinds of conversations, and we've made a lot of progress, but I think this is an indication of, you know, how far we still must go.
Peg, do you want to share with us a little bit about how you see the housing needs, which is tied to economic stability?
Absolutely. Well, I can, thank you. I'm Peg Haskell. I run a local program here in DC called DASH, District Alliance for Safe Housing, and we provide housing and housing advocacy for survivors of domestic violence here in the city. You know, I can only echo what has already been said. You know, it's really the three legs of the stool from the way we're looking at it. So the survivor's safety is obviously paramount, but then making sure that they have a safe place to live for themselves and their families. And, you know, that's not always an easy proposition. We're very grateful to receive a couple of Department of Justice grants from OVW for our transitional housing programs, and that's been incredibly helpful. And the need here in the district, at least, is huge, because the availability of affordable housing stock is shrinking drastically. And so there are so few places for survivors to seek safe, affordable housing here in the district. And then the third leg of that stool is obviously the income to be able to keep that affordable housing and having the access to job training and jobs so that they can stay in safe housing. So it's a complicated proposition, but from where I sit, if we can do everything possible to try and make sure that survivors have a safe place to go, or that they don't have to leave their affordable housing in order to become safe, And that's implementing, things like lock changes and lease changes, having their batterers, put out of the unit, emergency transfers within subsidized housing programs. There are a lot of different creative solutions to help survivors keep safe, affordable housing.
Safe places to live. Again, something that it should be a basic thing, because we're talking so often about not only the woman, the victim, but children, who get displaced. And we can't have a situation where a lack of housing, and I saw this happen. I saw this happen when I was a judge. We have a lack of housing drive a victim back to the battery. I saw that. You see in a second request for, for assistance from the court, and you wonder, well, what happened? And I talked to the lawyers afterwards, and they said, well, she had no place to go. And so she had to go back to the place where she was living with this man who then battered her, again. And that happens, in front of children. That has a negative impact on their ability to, be functioning and productive adults. So housing is obviously an issue that we are trying to deal with, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. But there's also an economic imperative that we have to deal with, because we shouldn't have economic reasons driving somebody back to a batterer. I don't have the ability to support myself. I don't have the ability to provide for my children, and therefore I go back to him. It's simply, again, not acceptable. And we have to understand that this problem is more than just about the crime itself, though that is very serious, and it is something that we have to focus our attention on and deal with. There are a whole bunch of collateral issues that flow from the crime that we have a responsibility to deal with in the criminal justice system, and that we're trying to do in this Department of Justice. And if there's anything else you want to say.
Yeah, I think, and I had the opportunity to go visit DASH about a month ago, so it was great to have the opportunity to see the program and see it in action, and a real tribute to you and your leadership with it. With our transitional housing grants that the Attorney General mentioned, we've looked at some real success in those grants, that 78% of the women who've gone through those programs have actually ended up in safe housing of their own choice. So they're going from women who are either homeless or right on the verge of homeless to having safe, affordable housing is just an incredible tribute to many of the providers that are doing this work. And I think, your ideas around, how to keep women safe in their homes are really key ones. And there's many places around the country that are doing really good work in those areas. And I think, we have a commitment at OVW to see if we can expand those kinds of ideas around the country, because it's key to try to keep women in safe places and not have them have to leave and become homeless. And why can't we try to keep women safe in their homes, and so the offender is actually the person leaving and not the victim.
Yeah.
So thank
Now,
you.
Futures Without Violence, you all work in the policy arena on these issues, so you want to weigh in, tell us what more we need to know from that perspective.
Sure. Thank you, Attorney General Holder, for the leadership of the Department of Justice and OVW in recognizing the economic effects of domestic and sexual violence for survivors. One of the areas that Futures Without Violence works on is thinking about economic security and employment issues for survivors. And there's a variety of policy and program issues that affect that. We are fortunate enough to work with our partners on an OVW grant program that is focused on making sure that victims have access to employment, getting and keeping a job, because we know that without that source of income, victims are more likely to stay with an abusive partner or unable to relocate if they're being stalked. And that grant program is really focused on educating employers and unions, because through your leadership, we know that it's not just victims and advocates who have to work to change the problem, but other sectors of society, including employers and unions. So we're working to educate them on how they can be proactive in addressing these issues, and not just firing victims, but actually making changes, just like in the housing arena, small changes to help victims stay employed and keep everyone safe. And that statistic you mentioned from the CDC report is really startling for employers when we take that to them and say,
Right.
this is costing you in terms of healthcare, productivity, and safety, and here's what you can do. And similarly, in VAWA reauthorization, we and our partners at Legal Momentum are working on an economic security title to ensure that victims are not fired from their jobs just
Right.
because they're victims, or if a stalker shows up in the workplace, and trying to ensure that unpaid leave is available to victims if they need to take time off to get legal assistance or to seek to seek medical care, to make sure to follow on the success of the unemployment insurance modernization reforms, that victims have access to that sort of economic support and can get unemployment insurance if they need to leave a job because of the violence against them. And finally, to enforce the provisions of the Affordable Care Act to prevent discrimination against domestic violence victims in accessing health insurance.
Again, all important things, and it also gets back to, I think, this whole question of sensitization. Employers who have employees, women, I think should always be, this is an issue that pervades our society. We have to recognize that. And so I think we always have to ask questions, well, why isn't this woman performing in the way that she did? Why is she missing work? Asking those kinds of questions and screening and understanding, what's going on here. And then having mechanisms in place so that somebody who is the victim of sexual violence or other kinds of gender-related violence has options and doesn't get re-victimized by a society, an employer that is not aware of what the person is going through and the needs, special needs that woman has, and that we ought to be addressing. Again, it helps the larger society. This cannot be viewed, as a woman's problem, as a women's issue, as a special an interest group that has a problem. Because this is something that has great societal impacts. It's as much a man's issue as anything, and we have to be sensitive. I keep using that word, but I think that's really important. We have to be sensitive to those unique issues that you described, and then come up with unique solutions for them, and understand that these issues can only be dealt with, I think, with kind of unique approaches, and we don't have to apologize for that. We don't have to justify that. It is a reality, and if we want to be effective here, we as a society, those of us in government, people in Congress, have to understand, at the state and local level, have to understand that things are going to look a little different. The mechanisms are going to look a little different, and there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
Lynn, can I offer
Yeah,
just
Gloria,
a very quick
please.
comment? I'm Gloria Terry with the Texas Council on Family Violence, and I'll take 30 seconds to just give you some landscape of Texas, and I've shared this profoundly with our delegation in Congress. 80,000, primarily women and children, were in shelter last year. We should be outraged that number of women and children were not able to be safe in their own homes. There were over 200,000 incidents of family violence reported through the Unified Crime Report. And we had 142 young women and women of all ages that were fatality as a result of an intimate partner situation. I say all of that to you to just give you that landscape. And I echo everything that everybody has said here, the value that OVW and all the funding and the protections that have been afforded to women as VAWA has grown in implementation. But what really struck me today is we're looking at all of these other intersections. It's not on point with the justice system, so bear with me, but I know that just recently there was another award for Assets for Independence, monies that went out. Texas was one of the recipients. We used that money and we actually stole a chapter out of the Kentucky Coalition's playbook on match savings accounts. And we were able to pilot a project in El Paso, Texas, where it does this accelerated savings. So for every dollar that the survivor puts into a savings account, it's matched with $2. We were able to be the non-federal match to that project. and the administrator of the project contributes the other dollar through the Assets for Independence project. So in short, all of this is yet another way to provide economic relief to women to be able to leave an abusive relationship and to be able to accelerate their savings so that they can get into, in this particular project, it's all about home ownership. So in a few short years, 3 years, they'll have adequate money for a solid down payment on a nice home. And they can braid other resources like down payment and closing cost assistance and other programs that will enable them the luxury that most of us have and as an opportunity to not have to return to an abusive relationship. So it was just an amazing intersection to hear about. A few short years ago, I was in direct service, and you wouldn't imagine and how humbled I was that the women in shelter, their work ethic, their entrepreneurial spirit, their ability to say, help me move, and I don't want to be in shelter for long, I want to be able to chart my own course forward. So I do applaud the many leaders that are in this room for the work that we've been able to do over the years.
The only thing I would take issue with is that there's no need for you to apologize, to think that that is not somehow part of what we have as a responsibility in the criminal justice field or at the Justice Department. Because the reality is, as I said, there are collateral consequences to the crimes that are, I guess, our primary responsibility. And the ability to come up with identifying programs like the one you're talking about that work. One of the things we really try to pride ourselves on in this Justice Department is that we are evidence-based. You know, what works, those are the kinds of things that we want to try to support. Those efforts that we have tried that do not work, we want to abandon because we have limited resources, limited amounts of time. We will have another 4 years, though. Limited amounts of time. So we want to make sure that we get this right. And to the extent that we have the unique programs that you were just describing, I mean, that's a part of what we have to be aware of in the Justice Department. Those are the kinds of things that we have to support because we have to look at this. Our responsibilities do not begin and end in the courtroom. You know, that's not what this Justice Department's about. It's not what any good criminal justice system should look like dealing with these issues. You have to understand the totality of what these crimes do to their victims and how do we as a system respond to all of those needs. So what you said is precisely relevant to the conversation that we're having in
And
this room
you
today.
also, Maria, you're doing that sort of direct economic advocacy every day.
Absolutely. Maria Pesqueira with Mujeres Latinas en Acción in Chicago. We provide domestic violence services as well as services to survivors of rape. One of the things that I wanted to first start with is thank you. We receive funding through for culturally specific services. I really want to applaud the department for including an opportunity to have a real lens at providing services that are very culturally specific and really allowed to reach and serve women in the way that best will provide services to them and their families. What I also wanted to talk about is the uniqueness of these services. What ends up happening is many of the women that we serve are of mixed status families. They may have U.S. citizen children, and let me just remind you that in the United States, 92% of Latinas in the U.S. under the age of 18 are U.S. citizens, right? So we're talking about mixed status families. But many of the mothers might not necessarily be of a documented status and will stay for fear of being deported. What I also want to applaud the fact that now there are provisions being looked at specifically for survivors of violence, and because we have seen women who have fallen through the cracks and are in deportation, are in the process of being deported just because she wanted to live free of violence. So I applaud the fact that now that's being looked at. I did want to also highlight the issue of entrepreneurship. Many times, women who become for the first time single head of household find themselves figuring out how to put food on their table. They have become micro enterprises, and they don't even realize it. They're figuring out how to, they're making flans or making tamales, sewing for family members or friends. And one of the things that we're trying to work with them on is how to see themselves as entrepreneurs. Latinas are the fastest growing entrepreneurs in this nation, many of whom began their first business because they were in a crisis. So I would also try to encourage some more investments into micro enterprises and provide incentives for micro loans, but also to assist during that process.
I mean, the issue that you talk about, I think another important one, and that is the resolution of this in its totality, the immigration issue. I mean, one of the great supporters of finding that solution are people in law enforcement, cops on the beat who tell, I remember we had a law enforcement summit, and that was one of the issues that they raised about the lack of reporting when somebody's concerned about their status or concerned about the status of somebody else who they are close to, and the number of crimes that go unreported, and of course the impact that has. And so this is an issue. So much of all of these things are tied together in so many ways. And so that's an issue that we have not been successful on in this term. My hope is that with maybe in this year, but more realistically in the next term, that's an issue that we have to confront and that we have to deal with. And this whole question of entrepreneurship, again, ways in which we can make women independent of their victimizers, independent of those who have done these horrible things to them. Again, these are concerns for the Justice Department. These are concerns that we have to meet. Do you anything you want to say there?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the immigration issue and around access to U visas and access to violent self-petitions are really key. I know there was a homicide study that was done in New York City, and disproportionately homicide victims are immigrants. So that whole the kind of chilling effect that can happen when we're discouraging immigrants from coming forward because of the fear for deportation. So addressing those issues, I agree, are key. And in terms of the entrepreneurship, again, I think a great idea in terms of how do we look at economic security in different ways. And Robin was talking about why there are opportunities for women, and I know some of the work that they do around green jobs and non-traditional jobs. And I think your concerns and your thoughts are very good ones for us to explore, so I appreciate them.
I want to make sure Rita Smith from NCADV, you get a chance to weigh in, and also Kathleen Biden, who is involved with a very innovative pro bono legal service program here that I wanted to make sure you had a chance to hear more about. But Rita?
I'm with the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
Sorry.
I hope I have some retinas by the end of
I'm
this.
very general if you don't stay directly. I really think that the impact that your legacy can have, your administration's legacy, it could go well beyond what we're doing right today. Is the interrelated connections between the agencies, the federal agencies. That it's not just Department of Justice looking at one set of things and Department of Health looking at another set of things, that you're actually looking cross-agency at how this can impact. And one of the things that I look at is that you're talking about crime. And what I look at is the studies that have recently come out around the adverse childhood experiences and the chronic long-term health issues that impact women and children's health for the rest of their life. Living in that trauma can in fact impact their health and their ability to do well in school, and their ability to maintain a job, and their ability to have a safe environment are all impacted by that crime that's being committed. And so I think that if we look at what's the economic impact is that they're going to be less able to be fully functioning as members of society at the capacity they could have in the past. And so I think that I really want to just thank you all, particularly Lynn, for leading that effort to just look cross-wide. Department of Transportation. Well, it's because, why would
would we be talking about? It's because women get raped at rest stops on interstate highways. So there is a connection everywhere you look. And there's a way for us to reduce the economic impact of that victimization everywhere for women. So thank you so much for doing that. And you know, however we can be assets in that effort, please keep us informed.
One thing I hope that you all will understand is that although I'm here as the cabinet person, I guess, and we have a specific focus here, you know, Lynn does a great job in kind of coordinating in the way that you have described. Because the reality is that, since I'll be parochial here, we have crime fighters in other agencies as well. At the Department of Labor, Department of Education, at HHS, at the Department of Transportation. There's a recognition by the heads of those various components that we all have to work together to deal with this issue specifically and crime issues more generally. That you can't simply think that, you know, the way you handle these things is by prosecuting people. You know, that's an important part of it. You can't prosecute your way out of these issues, and they have to understand that the consequences of domestic violence, sexual violence, go far beyond the things that have traditionally been thought of as what the Justice Department, the justice system ought to be doing. And so, you know, Kathleen Sebelius, Hilda Solis, Arnie Duncan are all crime fighters, all people who are responsible and understand they have a responsibility to deal with these issues. And as I said, we have a great coordinator here at the White House. We have women who give us our orders here in the White House. We dutifully follow.
And this is very important to the Vice President. You know, last summer he held the first ever cabinet level meeting looking at teenage and young adult women and the high rates of violence that they experience. But he often says, you know, this isn't only justice or only HHS, but it's Treasury and FDIC and labor, and the whole federal family is engaged. So thank you for that. And if we could turn to Kathleen.
You know, one thing I just say,
I'm sorry.
You mentioned the Vice President, and you know, I don't think we've ever had in the history of this nation two people at the head of the executive branch, as the President and the Vice President, who get it. Simply get it, you know. The Vice President has been dealing with these issues for decades, literally decades. And I'm sure he's as befuddled as I am that, you know, we're still dealing with this reauthorization issue up on the Hill. But this president and this vice president it really does start at the top. And to the extent that, you know, we're trying to sort out what our priorities are going to be, how we're going to focus the resources that we have. They keep front and center this whole notion of focusing on the issues that women are facing in a variety of contexts, but certainly in the one that has brought us together and in this room today. They get it. Those two get it.
And so, Kathleen, one of the areas that's been very important to the Vice President is pro bono legal assistance. And so you're working with a program here that's doing that. So last word to Kathleen.
I'd like to thank you for bringing this group together and let you all know, I remember when my father-in-law, when the bill passed, and my mother-in-law, which she loves to do, made posters and hung them on all the trees. I mean, it was probably one of the proudest things he's done in his career, so the family feels very strongly about this issue. I'm involved with a group here in DC Volunteer Lawyers Project, and we're doing, you know, what you're talking about, taking that moral obligation to help women who suffer from domestic violence. And what this group does, it was women who were lawyers but decided to stay at home and wanted to take on some cases, and started this organization to do sort of just an umbrella malpractice insurance. And it's grown in 5 years to over 600 lawyers, volunteer lawyers. We have donated over 12,000 hours, legal hours. We've helped 740 clients last year. And it's been incredible, and it grew much faster than we thought it would because women responded. And as you know, living in DC, we all know there are many lawyers who are not cracked. No shortage of lawyers. And so what happened was it grew from just stay-at-home mothers who were lawyers to government workers who grown, and it's amazing. It's, you know, the board is made up of all women, and we have had great success, and the women we're helping. You know, it's this idea that I think I didn't know, because I'm not a lawyer, the only one in the family, that women, when you're in an abusive relationship and you want to get out, you don't have a right to an attorney. And I think people sort of see that, you know, that we have more rights, but women who are leaving an abusive relationship often find themselves alone in court. And what we've also learned, which I know all of you know, is that the abuser continues to abuse in the courts. And so he will clog the courts and hold it up and exhaust a woman to the point where oftentimes she will give up. But what we're doing is providing legal services so that she's not alone. So it's been really positive in getting to know the domestic violence community. It's been a really great experience. So.
That's a very important effort. Again, I go back to my own experiences. As a judge, that would have been from, I guess, in the late 80s, early 90s, and when I was in doing domestic violence court, so often, you're exactly right, you'd have you know, the defendant there and with a lawyer, and then there was this woman by herself, you know, had filled out the necessary forms as best she could, but you know, not basically engaged in a fair battle. I mean, this is a guy with a lawyer, and she's there, and so we had, I remember young law students from Georgetown who were there, and I, you know, called for a recess, try to go back there and say, anybody can I get a Georgetown student to help, you know, this woman? And so the need for the program that you're talking about is an obvious one, and I salute you for your work. The Biden family gets it.
I know we want to hear from everybody, and it's hard for me to say no to Pat Bruce, but I think we're over your time, Mr. Attorney General. So any last words from you? I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm just really happy that we've had the chance to sit down and talk about some of the things that we're doing in the administration generally, in the Justice Department specifically. My hope would be that we'll continue to work together. Again, I hope that you all will think of us as partners, and as good partners, as good colleagues. Again, we are open to suggestions, criticisms, you know, ideas about how we can do what we're doing better. And I hope also that we'll recognize that the focus in this most important election that we are about to, you know, engage in. Women's issues are, you know, I'm the Attorney General, so I can't get political here, but I gotta say, as an American, I'm really kind of shocked at some of the things that I'm seeing, I'm hearing. The fact that I'm you know, going to be meeting with Senator Leahy, talking to the Vice President about how we're going to get VAWA reauthorized. You know, it's like it's hard for me to imagine that I'm doing these kinds of things. And I don't think that we should, all of us, should not lose sight of the fact that the progress that we've made in so many areas is at risk. It's at risk, and we have to make sure that your voices are heard, that people who get it are supported. And that at the end of this electoral process, we have in place people who are committed to these issues, who are committed to the women of this country and the unique problems that they face. As I said, I think we've got a president and a vice president who get it, but they can't do it alone. Lynn, I think, as I said, has done a great job in coordinating. B is going to do a wonderful job with me at the Justice Department. But we look forward to working with all of you in the months and years to come in that second term.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for coming.